In the cold, dark tunnels under Westminster Abbey, a special royal tomb sat quietly for hundreds of years. Inside was a heavy lead coffin, hiding secrets scarier than old ghost stories. This was the resting place of Queen Elizabeth I, England's famous Virgin Queen. When experts finally opened her tomb, they weren't ready for what they saw. They didn't just find a queen, they found something shocking. This was the same queen who had stood up to powerful kings, beaten the Spanish Armada, and ruled with great strength. But inside the coffin, she didn't look like a proud queen anymore. Her body was damaged and twisted by time, frozen in a terrifying way. It looked more like a horror story than a royal burial. The year was 1603, and the golden age of England was coming to an end. At Richmond Palace, Queen Elizabeth I was dying, but she didn't want to lie down. For many days, maybe even weeks, she stayed standing, shaking and scared. She didn't want to sleep because she was afraid of what would happen when she took her last breath. Courtiers whispered that she had visions of rot, of dissection, of her body brutalized after death. Those whispers would prove all too true. Centuries later, when the tomb was opened, her fears were not only validated, they were tragically surpassed. What they found inside that coffin wasn't just a body, it was a warning. The embalming inflicted on Elizabeth was little more than ceremonial butchery carried out while her body was still warm. Her organs were savagely removed, her brain pulled through her nasal cavity, and her hollowed form crammed with herbs and spices like some royal feast gone foul. And the final insult, the cruelest irony, another coffin lay directly above hers, that of her half-sister and bitter enemy, Mary the Roe. The Catholic Queen Elizabeth had feared and ultimately replaced, now rested atop her in death. In life they had battled for England's soul. In death, their corpses were stacked like refuse. Royal blood meant nothing to the worms who dined on both. Elizabeth, who had commanded armies, inspired poets, and ruled for nearly half a century, had decayed into a chemical soup, her body melting into its own fluids, her majestic legacy reduced to sludge. But this is more than a grotesque tale of royal death. It's a descent into the very heart of monarchy's darkest truths, where divine right gives way to decomposition and the illusion of power is peeled away by time. What investigators discovered in Elizabeth's coffin challenged every polished myth about her final days and shattered the carefully curated narrative of royal death in Tudor England. The truth was so disturbing, it was hidden for decades, deemed too shocking for the public to bear. As we unravel this chilling story, prepare yourself. This isn't the Elizabeth you read about in textbooks. The golden mask is gone. Beneath it lies the true face of death, swollen, stained, and silent. This story will force you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about power, about legacy, and about the brutal fate that awaits even the mightiest. On March 24, 603, the great halls of Richmond Palace were hushed. Elizabeth, Queen of England, was dying as she had lived, on her own terms. Refusing to lie down, she stood for hours, supported by her ladies, clinging desperately to the illusion of strength. She believed that once she lay down, she would never rise again, and she was right. This was the same woman who outmaneuvered kings and killers alike, who had survived court conspiracies, executed Mary, Queen of Scots, and turned back the greatest fleet in history. Yet now, she was a frail shadow, frightened and fading, gripping at the threads of a power slipping through her fingers. Her once celebrated face, immortalized in portraits and poetry, had become a cracked mask. Layers of white lead paint and vermilion flaked away, revealing sagging skin. Her famous red hair was long gone, replaced by wigs, and even those were losing their hold. Her body, bloated with fluid from dropsy, began to swell grotesquely. Her throat had developed a hideous abscess, a condition the court physicians called the royal disease. Swallowing became torture, and every breath carried the taste of rot. But her terror wasn't just of dying, it was of what would come after. She had seen firsthand the horrors of royal death. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, hastily buried in a common arrow chest after execution. Her father, Henry VIII, whose massive corpse had exploded in its coffin. These images haunted her. She begged for her body to be left untouched, but those wishes would be ignored. As Elizabeth swayed on her feet, refusing rest, the embalmers were preparing in secret. The sergeant surgeon had already gathered his tools, sharp blades for opening her abdomen, long rods for scrambling her brain, hooks and buckets for removing what remained. The machinery of royal death had begun turning before her final breath. To the outside world, the court kept up appearances. Musicians played, petitions were presented. The queen stood there silent and expressionless, a living statue barely clinging to breath. When she finally collapsed on March 23rd, it was a grim release. At 3 a.m. on March 24th, Elizabeth I died alone. Only a few servants remained, bound not by affection, but by duty. And in that moment, her body ceased to be hers. The transformation began. The queen was stripped bare, her body ravaged by age and poisoned by decades of toxic cosmetics, was a horror to behold. Beneath the paint, her skin was covered in sores. Her lips had curled back, revealing blackened, worn-down teeth. Her aquiline nose jutted out unnaturally. What the embalmers saw shocked even them. The first incision came quickly. Below the rib cage, the blade slid through bloated tissue, unleashing a wave of putrid air. The room filled with the sickly, sweet stench of royal decay. Incense was burned, but the odor of rotting power could not be hidden. Each organ was removed and studied, her heart enlarged and diseased, her liver bloated with fat, a sign of indulgent feasting. Her womb, still the focus of whispered speculation, examined for secrets that might explain her famous virginity. Then came the brain. Using a long iron rod, they pierced her nose, fractured the skull base, and began to liquefy her mind. That brilliant brain, once the seat of empire, slid out in chunks of gray slime. Even the hardened attendants gagged at the sight. The body, now hollow, was flushed with wine and vinegar. Then came the stuffing. Myrrh, frankincense, aloe, sawdust. Thick stitches closed the gash. The face was reshaped with wax and plaster. A fresh red wig was placed atop the skull. From a distance, she might have looked serene. Up close, she was a monstrous wax figure, stuffed with spices, dressed in silk, and parading as a queen. Her state funeral was a spectacle. Crowds lined the streets. Nobles marched in formation. Her coffin, draped in royal velvet, was carried through London on a black draped carriage. The effigy atop it, a lifelike replica, seemed to sleep, but the illusion was cracking. Even as the funeral unfolded, the body inside was decomposing. Strange noises, hissing, gurgling, escaped the coffin. Chemical reactions brewed within the sealed lead. The embalming had created a toxic pressure cooker. Leaking fluids reacted with spices and metals. Attendants quietly pierced the lead to release gas, quickly resealing it. Dr. Anthony, the Dean of Westminster, would later confess he heard unholy sounds coming from within the coffin. He dared not look inside. The funeral was hurried. As the coffin was lowered into the vault, a loud crack echoed, the sound of the lead giving way, or the swollen corpse shifting within. Whatever it was, they rushed to seal the tomb. Elizabeth was buried atop her half-sister Mary. The two queens, fierce opponents in life, now bound in a stone chamber, one at atop the other. Bitterness, rivalry, fear. It meant nothing in death. All that remained was the rot. But the story doesn't end there. In the years that followed, strange things happened at Westminster Abbey. Whispered tales of scratching sounds, of knocking beneath the floor. The official word, rats. But those who had been there knew better. Something was stirring beneath the stones. For 265 years, the royal vault remained untouched, sealed tight, its contents hidden from time and memory. But in 1868, driven by Victorian curiosity and the era's obsession with death, Dean Arthur Stanley made a fateful decision. He ordered the tomb of Elizabeth I open. What they found that October morning defied belief. The first challenge was simply locating her coffin. When workers breached the floor of Henry VII's chapel, they found chaos. Water had seeped in over the centuries. Coffins had collapsed. Bones of nobles, once meticulously separated, had mingled in a slurry of rot and moisture. The vault had become a democratic pit of decay. No titles, no crowns, just ruin. Dean Stanley's private notes, suppressed for decades, paint a scene of Gothic horror. The air, he wrote, was so foul it seemed alive. This wasn't the stillness of ancient death. It was active, writhing, as if decomposition had merely paused for a breath and resumed with new fury. The investigation team, equipped with primitive breathing devices, descended into what Stanley later called the Charles House of Monarchy. There, beneath Mary's collapsed coffin, they found Elizabeth, but her lead casket had not survived intact. The weight of Mary's coffin atop hers, combined with centuries of internal chemical reactions, had caused the two lead coffins to partially fuse together. The sisters, who had fought for a kingdom, were now fused in death. Metal had merged at the points of pressure, their bodies pressed together, not metaphorically, but literally. When workers attempted to separate the coffins with saws, the movement released a new wave of horrors. Inside Elizabeth's tomb was a scene that even seasoned investigators struggled to process. Her embalming, meant to preserve and honor her, had instead created something monstrous. The spices and herbs packed into her body had mixed with leaking bodily fluids, forming a black tar-like sludge that clung to every surface. Some parts of her body were strangely preserved, others had dissolved entirely. What remained was a nightmarish mix of desiccated skin, crystallized organs, and oozing rot. Most shocking was the condition of her skull. The wax mask, so carefully crafted after death, had melted. The plaster had collapsed. The skull had caved inward, creating a grotesque parody of the Queen's famous visage. A red wig, still mostly intact, framed the horror. A vibrant crown atop, a face that had caved in on itself. The jaw had dislocated. What teeth remained were blackened stubs. A scepter, now tarnished, lay tangled in the remnants of her garments. A golden orb, once a symbol of divine rule, was corroded and stained with acids from her decomposing body. Even more disturbing was what they learned about the embalming process itself. Rather than halt decay, it had accelerated it in some places, while preserving others, creating voids in the body where organs had been removed, voids that filled with gas and putrefaction, with nowhere for the gases to escape. In the sealed coffin, Elizabeth's body had stewed in its own fluids for centuries. Her flesh broke down, reconstituted, broke down again, entering a nightmarish cycle of decay the investigators would later call recursive putrefaction. When air touched the remains, the effect was immediate. Tissues that had survived began to collapse. Gases hissed from the corpse. Some of the team recoiled in horror, unable to look. One man reportedly vomited, another fainted, and yet they pressed on. They discovered the coronation ring, long rumored to have been cut from her swollen hand, now lying loose among the bones. Fragments of fabric clung to patches of skin like barnacles, fused together by time. The lead coffin had created a closed system, a vile laboratory where royal flesh met chemistry and transformed into something beyond recognition. Elizabeth's heart, once the subject of speeches and songs, was found in a small lead box, transformed. The tissue had crystallized. The result was a substance unlike anything seen before, organic, yet jewel-like. Toxic compounds of mercury, lead, and bodily fluids had fused at the molecular level, creating a dark red gemstone formed from sovereign flesh. The Virgin Queen's heart had become a literal jewel of death, beautiful, poisonous, terrifying. Other containers were found beneath the chapel floor. Traditional burial customs sometimes saw organs buried separately. These had ruptured long ago. Their contents had seeped into the abbey's foundations. Workers noted something uncanny. Certain stones, when struck, wept dark fluid that smelled of incense and rot. The abbey, London's great monument to faith and empire, had absorbed the remains of monarchy into its very bones. Lord Salisbury, upon hearing the full report, ordered all findings sealed, Official records were classified for 100 years, but some truths refused to stay buried. Rumors leaked. Artists smuggled out sketches. One, hidden for decades in Abbey archives, shows a figure that barely resembles a human. Part corpse, part wax, part nightmare. A hollow skull topped with a still-curled red wig. Even Queen Victoria, known for her fascination with death and mourning, was shaken by the reports. She ordered royal burial practices changed. Simpler embalming, faster interments. She never wanted what happened to Elizabeth to happen again. The scientific community was rocked. New protocols were developed for post-mortem treatment. Mortuary science changed, and deep within Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth's coffin was sealed once more. This time perhaps for eternity. But the horror remained. The lead coffin, still reacting to its contents, continued its silent chemical transformation in darkness. No one dared open it again. And perhaps that's for the best, because what the Victorians found inside wasn't just a rotting body. It was a revelation. Elizabeth had become more than a queen. She had become a grotesque symbol of what happens when power, pride, and human flesh collide with the unstoppable force of time. Every triumph she'd claimed, every speech she'd made now stood in the shadow of what she became. One of the lads seen and existing is a biochemical stew, a body not preserved but punished by ambition, by cosmetics, by rituals meant to deny nature. Her story, once gilded in glory, now reared of decay. But in that decay was a strange kind of truth, because Elizabeth's fate is not just hers, it's everyone's. Modern forensic analysis has since uncovered even more unsettling truths about what happened inside that lead box. The embalming materials chosen for their symbolism, their scent, their ceremonial weight, were chemically disastrous. They included compounds we now recognize as dangerously toxic: mercury, lead, arsenic. Instead of preserving Elizabeth's body, they poisoned it, initiating a unique and horrifying alchemy. What was meant to eternalize her ended up accelerating her dissolution. Inside that coffin, Elizabeth underwent multiple states of decomposition. Her body didn't simply decay into bone like the average corpse. It cycled, partially mummifying, then liquefying, then hardening again, like a grotesque resurrection happening in reverse. Some tissues crystallized, others turned to mush. Her corpse was no longer just a corpse. It was a rare chemical phenomenon, a mixture of human decay and environmental chaos unlike anything ever recorded. The team of Victorian scientists had no terminology for what they saw. One of them, Dr. William Hartley, coined a phrase in his journal, recursive putrefaction. His notes, later studied in private, described how Elizabeth's remains had decomposed, reformed, and decomposed again, over and over, trapped in a feedback loop of partial preservation and horrific reanimation caused by the airtight, chemically reactive environment of her sealed lead coffin. He wrote of nightmares, of seeing her face every time he closed his eyes. And he wasn't alone. Dean Stanley, the man who had initiated the opening of the vault, was haunted for the rest of his life. His sermons changed. He began preaching about the vanity of worldly achievement, the arrogance of trying to outwit death. He requested no royal ceremony for himself. When he died, he asked to be buried simply without pomp, without preservation. He had seen what glory became when buried under the weight of centuries. One artifact discovered, nestled among the bones, continues to captivate researchers to this day. A parchment fragment, its ink faint but unmistakable, it bore Elizabeth's own handwriting. "I dread not death, for it makes all equal." The irony is merciless. The queen who feared death, who tried to defy its indignities, was brought low in a way no monarch had ever been. Her terror was not misplaced. Every fear she had in those final days came true. And worse, she became equal not by dignity and death, but by being consumed by it in the most grotesque fashion imaginable. And perhaps that is the most enduring horror of all. Because this isn't just the story of Elizabeth's death. It's a mirror held up to all of us. No matter how many palaces we build, no matter how many portraits we commission, no matter how fiercely we cling to the illusion of permanence, we all end the same way. Flesh to rot, glory to sludge. Our monuments may endure, but our bodies betray us. Even the most magnificent among us are not spared. Elizabeth I tried to cheat that truth. She used ceremony, she used secrecy, she used science, and still her body broke down. Not quietly, not peacefully, but in monstrous fashion. Her legacy didn't crumble in battle or in politics. It crumbled in that lead coffin, groaning beneath Westminster Abbey, dripping into the stone. And yet in a strange way she achieved a kind of immortality. Not through triumph, but through decomposition. She became unforgettable not for how she lived, but for how she died, for what she became. Today, millions visit Westminster Abbey. They marvel at the stained glass, the soaring arches, the hallowed tombs. They walk the flagstones, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But every step they take echoes over a queen who still simmers in the dark. Every breath inside the abbey carries trace atoms of Elizabeth, now dispersed into the air, into the stone, into the very foundation of British memory. She is gone and she is everywhere. She is no longer just Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the mother of a golden age. She is an element, a gas, a part of the atmosphere. In death, she has become eternal, but not as she intended. Not immortal in marble, but eternal in rot. What they found inside Elizabeth's coffin was not simply grotesque. It was profound, because it stripped away every illusion. It reminded us that titles are temporary, power is fragile. Even legacy, so carefully constructed, so fiercely protected, can be undone by what happens after the final breath. Inside that coffin was the death of illusion, the putrefaction of pretense, the truth that no matter how high you climb, your body will return to the earth in ways you cannot control. Elizabeth built an age of gold, and she ended as chemical soup. She ruled over an empire and died beneath a melted wig. She defied kings and popes and time itself, but she could not defy biology. This is the horror and the poetry of her fate. It is terrifying, yes, but it is also leveling, democratic, absolute. In the end, all flesh yields, all crowns fall, and all queens dissolve into the same mixture of dust and darkness. As you walk through cathedrals, past tombs, past monuments to power, remember what lies beneath. Not statues, not saints, just bone, just gas, just history, decomposing in silence. Elizabeth I has become a symbol not of power's permanence, but of its inevitable decay. And in knowing that we may come to see her not as something above us, but as one of us, a woman, a body, a being fated as we all are to vanish.